California Senator LaFonza Butler. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we should say that you know Kamala Harris very well. Have you spoken to her since she's become the nominee, since she's been preparing for this speech? How is she thinking about this moment and the potential history-making candidacy of hers?
I've spoken to her since she's become the nominee. Tonight, she should probably be talking to fewer people and actually focusing on what she wants to tell the American people about herself. This is a moment where she gets to truly introduce herself to the biggest audience that has ever heard from her. And, you know, this is a moment where I think she gets to do that introduction. She gets to talk about her vision for the country, and she gets to invite voters who may have not yet made up their minds into her campaign and into her vision for the future.
You two have known each other for a long time. Back to her first AG run back in 2010, was my understanding, when you were leading a very powerful labor union there as well. You backed her campaign back then. What did you see behind the scenes in her candidacy then, in her leadership then, that you hope she conveys tonight to the crowd?
Her heart is her superpower. It truly is. When you, I've seen the vice president as, you know, attorney general walk a day in the shoes of a home care worker, doing the work with Wendy Co in Oakland, California, to taking care of a disabled and elderly person in the community. And from that moment to this, the same heart has been on display. The way in which she sort of grasps my daughter's face and tells her that she is as special and as talented and has something to contribute to this country. It's the exact same way that she talked with and worked with Wendy Co almost 15 years ago. She is the exact same person today as she was then. And I'm excited about the American people getting an opportunity to see and get to know who I have seen and known.
Let's talk campaign strategy for a second, because before you were a senator, you were president of Emily's List, which is an advocacy group that supports Democratic women for office who support reproductive rights. Montana this past week became the 8th state to put on the ballot come November a ballot measure that will enshrine reproductive rights. That could be a boon for Senator Jon Tester for his tight Senate race there. And for key states like Arizona and Nevada, how are Democrats thinking about that in terms of moving the needle come November?
Look, ever since the Supreme Court made the decision to rip away the rights of women in their Dobbs decision, every time voters had the opportunity to make a decision, they have always chosen freedom. And so we have to think about the ways in which coalitions come together to fight for what it is that they have in common, whether that's Kansas or Ohio. It is independent voters together with Democratic voters, women and young women on all across the spectrum, including males who want to be a part of this coalition, who have come together to fight for protecting these rights. Now, we've got to make sure that we're communicating the difference between candidates who stand with voters who support protecting these rights and those who don't. And there's going to be a clear contrast, and I think that's got to be a real important part of the strategy, linking both of those two things together.
You know, it strikes me, you have the experience of fighting for change from the outside as an advocate activist and from the inside as a U.S. senator. Which approach is more effective?
It's not an either or. You know, the moments in our country where we have made the greatest change and the most impactful difference are captured in photos that have both iconic activists and organizers like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and elected leaders like President Nixon. And those kinds of photos have produced the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Housing Rights Act. And so I think when we try to oversimplify the complicated nature of creating change in our community is when we think that there's only one way to do it. And it really does require everyone in the boat rowing in the same direction. And we have the opportunity to do that when we elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to the White House.
Vice President Harris has been very clear on where she stands when it comes to freedom around reproductive rights and access. Now she has an economic plan. We've seen some policy proposals put out. People have questions about some other big issues, though. Things like immigration, things like how she would talk about or actually change policy when it comes to U.S. arms support for Israel and their war in Gaza. That's an issue we have seen roil a party right now. Do you think that she needs to break with any of the policies of the Biden administration to go on her own path and, as you say, stay true to who she's always been?
I think the American people deserve to have a serious examination and interrogation of both candidates' policies. What is it that are going to be the plans of foreign policy relative to protecting Palestinian families, maintaining a relationship with Israel, getting hostages returned? The vice president has been clear that those are key objectives for her. I'm not quite sure what former President Trump has said about those things. I think the vice president has made clear that she's want to focus on bringing down costs, focusing on key cost drivers that everyday families are experiencing, whether it's housing and rent, health care and groceries. President Trump talks a lot about inflation. I'm not sure that anyone has interrogated what that plan is besides a tax on imports and tariffs into this country, which drives up costs for working families. We need to have a conversation in our country about the plans for climate change. I think that there should be real interrogation for how we're going to ensure that we are protecting families all across this country, as well as our farmers and agricultural community. There's farmers in California that have great things in common with farmers in Iowa and Kansas and Oklahoma, and we need to be figuring out solutions to those, as Oklahoma has seen the highest number of tornadoes this year than they have on their history of record. And so there are real challenges that we need to have a conversation about in this debate and in this election. We need to have both candidates put those policies on the table and have a serious conversation about that so the American people can make a decision.
California Senator LaFonza Butler, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me.